Good morning. We are going through this cycle of loving your neighbors, getting into the lives of people who are in your circle of influence, and just loving on them. Loving them the way that you expected to be loved and treated, moving them to loving God, getting them to worship. By the way, if somebody walked into worship today, I don't know, like I love a cappella music, and there's just something so pure about it. And I just loved sitting and listening this morning. It's incredible. And you get connected to God. Getting people connected to God and loving God and then moving them to serving others. Because if all we're doing is just coming and showing up to worship, we're really missing the point as to why we're here as Christians. We've got to serve other people who are in need. Our theme this year is God first. Our theme verse comes from Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 7. You shall teach them, that is the commandments, to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. We're breaking this up into different quarters. So this quarter is God and family. How do we connect with God in our home, with our family, together as a group, as a family group? And so today we're talking about hospitality. Have any of you, let's do a little poll here. Have any of you interacted with a stranger at some point in your life, walked away from that stranger and thought, man, did I just miss an incredible opportunity to show the love of Christ? Anybody feel that way? A lot of you? Missed opportunities. We have a lot of them. And I've told this story here before, but this is going way back to my original trucking days, back whenever I first started to drive truck coast to coast. And I was pulling up, I was at the end of my shift and I was tired. I was pulling up to a truck stop and I'm at a stoplight. I can see my truck stop in view and it's just looking wonderful because that meant I got to take a shower, I got to eat dinner, and I got to crawl in the cab and just go to bed and just veg out for the day. And I pull up to the stoplight, and this guy's standing there, a homeless guy, and he's holding a sign. And he wasn't aggressive. And, I don't know about you, but I'm not a fan of the aggressive people who shout and yell and, curse at you. I'm just not a big fan of that. But people who stand there and they kind of quietly hold a sign up, I don't have a problem with that. But this day, I was annoyed because he was right outside my window. He's holding a sign up, and he's not dancing around, but he's just holding a sign. And I refused to look at this man. And so I pulled away once the light turned green. I parked my truck, and I'm riddled with guilt. I legitimately felt horrible. So I was like, I'm going to make it up to him. I'm going to buy food, and I'm going to bring it back. And so I did. I bought an actual really nice meal. Brought it back to him. I handed it to him there on the street corner. He was super kind and appreciative. And he's like, man, he said, you have no idea what this means to me. He's like, thank you so much. And I walked away, and I felt okay after that. And I go to a restaurant to get my dinner, and I look out the window, and I see him distributing this food to all kinds of other homeless people. And I'm like, I literally bought enough food for one person. And he's handing it out to 5 or 6 different homeless people. And I thought, what a cool, humble gesture. And so I finished eating and I walk out and this guy's back behind the restaurant and he's digging in a dumpster. I had bought him food. He didn't eat it. He gave it to his friends and he's digging in a dumpster behind a restaurant. So I was like, man, that's not going to work. I was like, let me get you food. So I went and I bought a ton more food, brought it back, and the group, they're all together behind this restaurant. And I bought enough food for everybody to have their own meal. And I hung out with him for a while, and I'll never forget his name. He was all tattooed up, and I was like, what's your name? And he was like, just me. And that was my first real interaction with a homeless person, and I realized a lot of homeless people don't go by their own name. They make their own name up because they don't feel worthy enough to have a name, and they're just some anonymous homeless person out there, and so they give themselves just a kind of a nickname. His nickname was Just Me. And so I ended up talking to them for probably an hour or more. And it was a really cool experience. And I got to pray with them and got to tell them a little bit about who God is and why I felt compelled to give. And they were super polite and respectful about that. And I thought, that's what we're talking about today. This is the hospitality that's mentioned in the Bible. A lot of times we think about hospitality as opening up your home and no offense, but I wasn't going to open up my truck, open up the cab to 7 different homeless people to come into the cab of my truck. But we think of hospitality as opening up our home and entertaining people. And while that's part of it, that's not really the true sense of the word. So the Greek word for that is philoxenia, which comes from 2 different words. It's 2 words sandwiched together. And so the first word is philos, which means, it's where we get the word phileo, which is the verb form of it, which means brotherly love. So we have the city Philadelphia, which comes from the Greek word philos or phileo, which means it's literally like a brotherly kind of love. Like you're treating somebody as a family member. It's not an impassioned love. It's more of your family. And family sticks together. So that's the first part of the word. And the other word is xenos, which means stranger. So literally, it's love of strangers. And so here's a definition pulled straight out of a Greek lexicon. So properly, it means warmth, which is the friendliness part, loving your neighbor, or loving somebody like a brother. So warmth shown to strangers. Figuratively, it's the readiness to share hospitality or generosity by entertaining in one's home. But the true sense of the word literally means loving strangers like a brother. And that's the hospitality that's mentioned throughout the Bible. Now, it's not mentioned a whole lot in the New Testament, but here are the passages that mention it. Romans chapter 12, verses 12 through 13 says, "Rejoice in hope, be patient in tribulation, be constant in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. Seek to love strangers. Seek to be a friend and to be kind to strangers." And I feel like that's our lot here on earth as Christians, is to show love, show compassion to people who are strangers. And if we did this more, I think we'd have a less hostile world, right? Because a lot of times we don't have time for strangers. We don't really think about that as a Christian mission. And so we end up being a group unto ourselves. We end up clustering together. We end up kind of forming Christian cliques. And so there are people out there and there are people in here. We're in church, we're part of the church, and then there are those people out there. And we don't mean to do that, but it's because we don't practice hospitality and we have missed opportunities. And it's cool when we stop and we actually take time to talk to people. And this is kind of a mild example of this, but I was in the hospital visiting Charles the other day, and I'm walking out, he gets discharged and we're walking out, and I'm wearing a steel hat, the chainsaw brand, chainsaw and weed eaters. Sorry, Eric. I mean, real men wear real hats. and one of the male nurses stopped me and he's like, "Dude, I love your hat." And so we got into this really lengthy conversation about cutting wood, and I was joking about him coming, and I was like, "If you have spare time, I have this big massive pile of wood at the house." And so people learned in that process that I kind of belong to the church across the street, And it's an opportunity where when we show hospitality, show kindness to strangers, these conversations just open up. And we can show people the love of Christ without being, door-knocking weirdos who show up on the step of people's houses when they don't want us there in the first place. And we're jamming Bible tracts in their face. You can do this a different way. So this is what the Bible's talking about. Contribute to the needs of the saints. Find people who are in need, who are other Christians, step in and help them. Contribute to their needs and help them out. And show kindness to strangers. 1 Peter 4, 7 through 11 says this. The end of all things is at hand. Therefore, be self-controlled and sober-minded for the sake of your prayers. Did you catch that? Like, not for your own personal well-being, not for your own spiritual health, not so that you can feel better and clear-minded, but be sober-minded, be self-controlled for the sake of your prayers, which implies what? That your prayers are for other people. For the sake of others, when you pray for other people, be self-controlled and be sober-minded. Be clear-minded, be sober-minded for the sake of your prayers for other people. Above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since this is one of Mom's favorite passages. Love covers a multitude of sins. I remember us having many conversations about that at the kitchen table. What does that mean, that love covers a multitude of sins? It doesn't cover up sins. It covers sins. When people sin, you find a way, instead of judging people, to talk to people like they're human beings. You find a way to share Christ with other people. You find a way to encourage other people to do better. You find a way to gently correct people. Love covers a multitude of sins, so love each other earnestly. Show hospitality. Here it is again. Show kindness, show love to strangers. Show that strangerly kind of love to one another without grumbling. Don't complain about people. We as Christians, we as people, it's not really a Christian thing, it's a human thing. We tend to grumble about people. And we're like, well, so-and-so, do you know what they asked me to do? Do you know what they did? And we start grumbling about people. And Peter's saying, don't do that. Show love to strangers and treat each other that way. Show this hospitality. Give a piece of your heart to people and do it without grumbling. Don't complain about what people did or didn't do this past week. Don't complain about how hard you have it and all these other people are living, this wonderful dream. Don't complain, don't grumble. Just do it. As each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace. Whoever speaks is one who speaks oracles of God. In other words, if you're going to open your mouth, if you're going to speak, if you're going to talk, don't toss word salads out there. Don't bash people. Don't talk bad about people. Talk as if you're speaking the very words of God himself. Use your mouth, use your lips, use your voice to encourage people, to build them up, and to treat them with kindness. Don't miss these opportunities. If you have the gift of talking, some of us have a really good gift of talking and can do it a lot. Like a marathon, right? We just don't give up. If you have that gift, isn't that cool that that's a gift, by the way? The gift of gab. It is a gift. But if you have it, use it to serve other people. If you're speaking, speak as one who speaks the very oracles of God. If you serve, if your gift is serving, some people do not speak well. In conversations or publicly, it's not a gift. But that's okay, because some people serve and they serve well. I remember Bill Riggs talking about how uncomfortable he was standing up here to give sermons, Bible classes. He hated doing it. He would do it, he would still do it, but he did not like doing it. It made him very uncomfortable because he said, it's not really my gift. But serving was his gift. And if that's your gift, do it as somebody who serves by the strength that God supplies, in order that in everything God may be glorified through Jesus Christ. To him belong glory and dominion forever and ever. Amen. Do you see how all of this points to God? We're not being hospitable. We're not being kind to people. We're not being compassionate to people for our own sake. We're not doing it to make ourselves feel better. We're not doing it to give ourselves a pat on the back. We're not doing it because we're like, well, I did my duty this week. We're not doing any of that. We're doing all of this to glorify God, to point to God, to point people to God. At the end of the day, yeah, it's good to help somebody make it one more day to not have to dig in a dumpster, right? That's a good thing. Like, nobody's going to argue that that's a good thing. It's a better thing if you point them to Christ. If you use that opportunity to feed them and to give them God's word, to lead them to Jesus Christ. Point them to God. That's what Peter's saying here. I love this passage. Hebrews 13, verses 1 and 2. Let brotherly love continue. That's the word phileo I was talking about, the verb form of philos, which is brotherly love. Let brotherly love continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality. Don't neglect to treat strangers with love, with brotherly love. Don't neglect to show strangers brotherly love, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. I think that's such a cool passage, and I don't think it's figurative. I don't think it's like hyperbole. It's not an exaggeration. I think that some people have quite literally entertained angels and didn't have a clue. Isn't that a cool idea? Isn't that a cool passage? That sometimes when you show that stranger kindness, that well could have been an angel and you'd never know it. God's not going to reveal that to you. He's not going to be like, hey, by the way, did you know that was an angel you were talking to? We have entertained angels. Some of us very well could have entertained angels and didn't even know it. Be careful to show kindness to strangers. The rule of thumb should be just do it. If there's a stranger who comes into your life, be kind to them, even if they're miserable. Sometimes that's hard. We see strangers, and sometimes we see strangers acting pretty erratically, using language that we probably wouldn't use in public. We see people and we're like turned off by that. We're like, well, don't they realize there are kids around? Like, we catch ourselves doing that. But the reality is, there's probably a lot going on in their life that we're not aware of. So treat them with kindness. And then 1 Timothy 5, 9 through 10, Timothy's giving instructions for widows, women who've been widowed, and there's a distribution of food and things to help take care of them, to provide for them. And then he's kind of given a list of who makes that list of widows, because some widows shouldn't be on that list. And Timothy goes on to explain, he's like, there's some widows, like young widows especially, like keep them off that list if other people can provide for them. If they have family members who are taking care of them, keep them off that list so that we have resources within the body to be able to take care of people who truly are in need. And I think that's very wise. But here are the widows who make the list to be able to receive help from people. Let a widow be enrolled if she is not less than 60 years of age, having been the wife of one husband, and having a reputation for good works. If she has brought up children, has shown hospitality. There's our word again. Has shown hospitality, has washed the feet of the saints, has cared for the afflicted, and has devoted herself to every good work. Then she qualifies. Wouldn't that be cool for part of our welfare system work this way? Right? Like you kind of, interestingly, these widows had to earn the right to be taken care of because the church's resources were very limited. And Timothy was saying, don't just hand money out, don't freely hand money out to people who are going to, blow that and squander it. Find people who legitimately have a need and who are hospitable people, who are kind people, who wash feet of the saints. They care for the afflicted. They take care of people themselves, even if they don't have the means to do so. There are a couple different passages, and we'll end with this. Jesus certainly showed hospitality to people. He was kind to strangers, and he didn't let opportunity pass him by. Here's a group of women in Luke chapter 8 that Jesus was incredibly hospitable to. He was kind to these strangers. Luke chapter 8, verse 1. Soon afterward, he went on through cities and villages, proclaiming and bringing the good news of the kingdom of God. And the 12 were with him, that is, the 12 apostles. And also some women who had been healed of evil spirits. Jesus surrounded himself with women who had these evil spirits. They were demon-possessed. Whatever these spirits were, whatever they made these women do, a lot of times there was forced, coerced behavior. Like we find a little boy who the demon is constantly throwing him into the fire, throwing him into the water, trying to kill him, and Jesus cast that demon out. Demons forced people to do things they wouldn't normally do. The demoniac, full of a legion of demons, superhuman strength. He's breaking chains. He's chained up inside of a cave. He's yelling, he's shouting, he's cursing. Jesus cast the demons out of him. And so here are these women who had been healed of evil spirits and infirmities. We don't know what these infirmities were, but they probably were pretty severe, which meant that they were chronically ill, maybe mental disabilities. We don't know. But Jesus healed them, and listen to their names. Mary called Magdalene. Pop quiz time. Who was the first person to the tomb when Jesus rose from the dead? Mary Magdalene. Is that interesting? Do you think that ever would have happened ever if Jesus hadn't shown compassion and kindness and love to her when she was a stranger? Jesus didn't know her at this point, but Jesus showed compassion to her and invited her into his ministry, and she ended up becoming like a second mother to Jesus. In fact, she's the one who went back after Jesus rose from the dead and she proclaimed the risen Christ to all of the other disciples. How cool is that? Mary Magdalene, whom 7 demons had gone out, and Joanna, the wife of Chuza, Herod's household manager. By the way, Herod was a Roman official, not well liked, definitely not well liked among the Jewish people or the Christians. His wife, or this man who works for Herod, his wife is one of the women who followed Jesus throughout his entire ministry. And Susanna and many others who provided for them out of their means. These were women who provided, they gave their wealth, and they helped people, including Jesus, in their ministries. And then finally, in Matthew 25, we have the separation of the sheep and the goats. And I think this is the prime example of what it's like to offer hospitality to people who are strangers. Because Jesus says, maybe it's not just angels that you entertain, maybe it's me. That ought to wake us up a little bit. Jesus says, I'm going to skip a little bit of this for time's sake. Verse 32, Matthew 25:32. Before him will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will place the sheep on his right, but the goats on the left. Then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. And then the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty, or give you a drink? When did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the king will answer them, truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me. Then, of course, he gives the example of the people who didn't do all those things. And he says, those are the goats. You're going to be separated. You're going to be set apart from the sheep, and you're going to be cast into hell. And they're going to say, well, Lord, when did we see you hungry and naked? And when did we see you thirsty? And he says, verse 45, truly I say to you, as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. Practice hospitality. Find strangers and treat them with love and kindness. Treat them with compassion, and don't let opportunities pass you by to do this. It's that important. This week, I pray that you go out, that you bless people, that you find people to be kind to. Show compassion, show patience, show kindness to people who are strangers. If you've not yet taken the step to put Christ on in baptism and you'd like to, we would invite you to come up, or if you have prayer needs, you can come up as we all stand and sing the song together.